What I'm dealing with is hard because it involves more than just my heart. It involves a lot of little hearts. You know, we have 4 kids, and divorce is never easy. And we're both from divorced families.
4 years, Kelly Clarkson was the woman who had it all. A voice that could stop a room cold. A career built not on luck but on raw, undeniable talent. A family that looked, from the outside, like the kind of love story people write songs about. And she did write songs about it. Beautiful, honest, soul-bearing songs that made millions of people feel seen. But behind every one of those songs was a truth that Kelly kept locked away, a truth about her marriage, about the man she loved, and about the years she spent quietly holding everything together while something inside her was slowly coming apart. Now, for the first time, Kelly is speaking. Not through a carefully worded statement from a publicist. Not through lyrics that could be interpreted a dozen different ways. But in her own voice, with her own words, laying bare the parts of her story that the world never got to see. And what she has revealed about Brandon Blackstock, about who he really was behind closed doors, about what truly happened in that marriage, has left people stunned. Because to this day, most people had no idea. To understand what went wrong, you have to understand what Kelly Clarkson believed she had found. When she first crossed paths with Brandon Blackstock in 2006 at a rehearsal for the Academy of Country Music Awards, she was already one of the most recognizable voices in American music. She had won American Idol, broken Billboard records, sold millions of albums, and proved every doubter wrong. But fame had not filled the particular kind of emptiness that Kelly had carried since childhood, the absence of a father who walked out when she was 6 years old, the longing for someone who would stay, who would choose her, who would make her feel like enough. Brandon seemed to be that person. He was confident, connected, deeply embedded in the music industry as a talent manager. He was charming in a way that felt effortless. When their paths crossed again years after that first brief meeting, something shifted. Their friendship grew slowly and then all at once, the way meaningful things often do. By December 2012, he had proposed, and Kelly said yes with the kind of certainty that she had spent her whole life waiting to feel. What the public saw when Kelly and Brandon married in October 2013 was a love story that felt earned. She spoke about him in interviews with warmth that was impossible to fake. She described feeling a connection she had never experienced before. They blended their families. Brandon's 2 children from a previous marriage joined the fold, and then came River Rose in 2014 and Remington Alexander in 2016. From the outside, it was a full and beautiful life. What nobody saw was the quiet unraveling happening beneath the surface. For a long time, Kelly Clarkson protected the private details of her marriage with the same fierce discipline she applied to everything else in her life. Even as the divorce proceedings became painfully public, even as legal battles over custody and property dragged on for months, she maintained a careful silence about the most personal aspects of what had gone wrong. She deflected, she redirected, she kept her focus publicly on her children and her work. But Kelly has begun speaking more openly about what she experienced, and the picture she paints is one that surprises people who assumed they already knew the full story. One of the most striking things Kelly has revealed is the profound loneliness she felt throughout much of the marriage. Not the loneliness of being physically alone. She was surrounded by people, by children, by the constant noise of a working household, but the deeper loneliness of feeling unseen by the one person who was supposed to see her most clearly. She has described feeling, on many occasions, as though she were essentially a single woman who happened to be married. The partnership she had imagined, the emotional availability she had hoped for, was simply not there in the way she needed it to be. What makes this revelation land so heavily is the context of who Kelly is. This is a woman who grew up with an absent father, who spent her formative years learning to be self-sufficient because she had no other choice, who built an entire career on the foundation of emotional honesty. For someone with that history to say she felt invisible in her own marriage is not a small admission. It speaks to a pattern that was serious enough to persist across years, serious enough to leave a lasting mark. There is another dimension to the Kelly and Brandon story that rarely gets the attention it deserves, and it is one that Kelly herself has hinted at with increasing candor. Their relationship was not simply a romantic partnership, it was also a professional one. Brandon Blackstock was not just her husband. He was, for a period of time, involved in the management of her career. That overlap between personal and professional created complications that were difficult to navigate even in the best of circumstances. When the marriage began to deteriorate, those professional ties became another source of conflict. The legal battles that followed the divorce filing in June 2020 were not limited to questions of custody and property. There were financial disputes, questions about how her career had been managed, and allegations that were deeply uncomfortable for everyone involved. While Kelly has been measured in how much she says publicly about these specifics, she has made clear that the dissolution of the marriage was not simply about two people growing apart. There were layers of betrayal, layers of complexity, that made the healing process significantly harder. The Montana ranch became a particularly painful symbol of all of this. It was a place Kelly had loved, a home she had poured herself into, and the legal fight over it dragged on in ways that forced her to keep reliving the hurt. When the court ultimately ruled that the ranch belonged solely to Kelly, and when Brandon was finally ordered to vacate the property by June 2022, there was relief, but also an exhaustion that came from having had to fight for something that should never have been contested in the first place. Perhaps the most quietly devastating part of what Kelly has shared is the realization that she held so much of this alone for so long. She is, by nature and by necessity, a strong person. She learned early in life that crying without someone to comfort you is a waste of tears, that if you want something done, you do it yourself. That survival requires a kind of emotional self-sufficiency that looks like strength from the outside even when it is actually just endurance. During the years of the marriage's decline, Kelly kept performing. She kept showing up to television appearances, to award shows, to interviews where she laughed easily and spoke warmly. She kept being Kelly Clarkson in public while privately carrying a weight that most people never suspected was there. This is not unusual for public figures, but the gap between Kelly's public face and her private reality during this period was apparently significant enough that even people close to her did not fully grasp how much she was struggling. She has spoken about the way chronic emotional pain can become normalized, how you adjust your expectations, then adjust them again, until you have adjusted them so far down that you have forgotten what you originally hoped for. That slow erosion of hope is one of the most insidious things a difficult marriage can do to a person, and it is something Kelly has described with the kind of precision that only comes from having lived it. When Kelly filed for divorce in June 2020, the announcement stunned her fans. But in retrospect, the signs had been building for years in ways that were invisible to anyone who was not paying close attention. The timing was significant. The world was in the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, a period when many couples found themselves trapped together in close quarters, forced to confront problems they had previously been able to outrun with busy schedules and professional obligations. For Kelly, the forced stillness of that period appears to have clarified what had been murky for years. When the noise of her career was stripped away, when the travel and the performances and the packed calendars were suddenly gone, what remained was the reality of her home life. And that reality, she has suggested, was no longer something she could rationalize or endure. The legal proceedings that followed were grueling by any measure. Spousal support negotiations, custody arrangements for River and Remington, the Montana ranch dispute, all of it played out with various details leaking into public view. In November 2020, a judge granted Kelly primary custody of the children, which represented a significant legal victory but also a personal one. Her children were, and remain, her absolute priority, and securing their stability was the thing she fought hardest for. Brandon's opposition on various fronts during the divorce proceedings surprised many observers. The image of the charming, easygoing talent manager did not align easily with the picture that emerged from the legal battles. Kelly has been careful not to use her public platform to attack him directly, but the shape of what she has shared makes clear that the experience was one she found genuinely shocking in places, that there were things he did, positions he took, that she had not anticipated from a man she once trusted completely. The phrase to this day, "Nobody knew this about Brandon Blackstock," is not hyperbole. Kelly has indicated that there are specific truths about her marriage and about his behavior within it that she kept private out of a combination of loyalty, privacy for her children, and a deeply ingrained reluctance to be seen as someone who tears other people down in public. But the things she has begun to reveal paint a picture of a man who was not entirely who he presented himself to be. She has spoken about feeling that the partnership was fundamentally unequal, that she was giving in ways he was not, emotionally and otherwise. She has hinted at a dynamic in which her generosity, her tendency to take responsibility and to smooth things over, was taken advantage of rather than reciprocated. She has described coming to the gradual and painful understanding that some of what she had interpreted as love was actually something more transactional, more calculated, than love is supposed to be. This is a hard thing to say about someone you once believed in completely. It is a harder thing to live with. And Kelly has been honest about the fact that the grief she felt was not simply the grief of a marriage ending. It was the grief of a particular story about herself being dismantled. She had believed she had finally found the kind of steadfast, loyal love she had missed as a child. Learning that this belief had been, in significant ways, mistaken was a wound that went far deeper than the divorce itself. What is remarkable about Kelly Clarkson is not that she suffered. Suffering is human and ordinary and inevitable. What is remarkable is what she did with it. Her 10th studio album, Chemistry, released in June 2023, stands as one of the most emotionally honest records of her career. It is an album about love and the death of love, about the complicated feelings that linger even after a relationship has clearly run its course. Critics recognized it immediately as something special, not because of its production or its commercial appeal, but because of its emotional truth. She also made a bold geographic move, relocating to New York City with River and Remington to film the 5th season of The Kelly Clarkson Show. The move was symbolic as much as practical, a declaration that she was not going to remain in the places and routines that had been defined by her marriage.